some specific groups of people in that
Mostly males that enter the workforce, not encouraging children, because children tend to speak Spanish when they go to school.
I didn't get that part.
They go to school and they get English. English, sorry, Spanish.
Okay.
They learn Spanish.
Okay. But do you know if these indigenous languages are also taught at school, in some schools? Are there programs for the teaching
They
of
are
those?
not taught, but the teacher understands. There's special schools for children that do not speak Spanish as a mother tongue.
Mother tongue.
So the teacher knows, understands that this one is in Spanish.
Okay. Okay. There are other provinces, like for example Formosa, in which some indigenous languages are maintained through official programs at school. That is, the languages are taught with the aim that the children of those peoples maintain their language, and they can eventually use it in their communities, in the school environment, and eventually transmit it to the future generations.
This is the case in a very specific small town in which the level of school and the level of children of the school is very low.
Okay.
I was checking Google information about. Sorry, I was checking on Google information about Estado Plurinacional de Bolivia, in which the state recognizes not only Spanish as the official language, but also the existence of other 36 indigenous languages, and they are official languages, and it is done in order to promote the quality in the use of those languages. And it's also, I cannot find like the law, let's say, or the act, but I think that it's also promoted like to be taught at schools, those languages, and they coexist.
Okay. Why does this make sense? Because these decisions have an impact on society. They have consequences. If a language is declared as official language at national level, or it has some status at the local level, then the government, the Ministry of Education, have to make provisions for the teaching of these languages. And what is necessary for the teaching of indigenous languages, for example? What is necessary for the teaching of Toba, Kwon teachers?
Human resources.
Your teachers. Resources, right? Resources like dictionaries, books, and these are products of other kinds of decisions about language, which count as what kind of planning? Decisions about corpus planning. What is corpus planning?
Decisions about, I don't know.
Yeah, you know.
Come on,
Because
Sophia.
you apply the concept correctly, so we know that you know.
Well, decisions made about the materials which are used, such as dictionaries, books.
Well, not just the materials, but what will be included.
Okay.
You know, the selection.
It's not about the dictionary,
Right.
Sophia. It's about what is in the dictionary.
The language.
Right.
So, what you say about standardization may be useful here because it involves selection between different options of some linguistic forms for qualification, and then, you know, the process of standardization.
So, Sophia, right?
Yes.
So,
Imagine those communities of those communities in which Quom is spoken. Each community that is separated one from the other geographically, they speak different varieties of Quom, different dialects of Quom, with some pronunciation differences in some words, some different lexical items for the same objects in some cases. So, somebody, usually a linguist that studies Quom, together with some teachers, that is a team of people that work with languages, need to make decisions about which alternative for a given lexical variable, or which alternative for a pronunciation variable, or for a grammatical variable, which one they're going to include in the dictionary they are generating, or in the grammar that they are writing for Quom, or the option they're going to use in the textbook they are producing to teach that language. So, making a decision in favor of one variant and leaving the other variants out is, what do you call that? Standardization. Okay? So, standardizing a particular language, opting for one language variety instead of another, counts as corpus planning. But that's not the only case. Other cases include what happened a couple of years ago in German, where an orthographic symbol that represents that is like the beta Greek symbol was replaced for a different combination of characters so that writing on the computer would be easier. Okay? So that affects the orthography of German. That counts as corpus planning. Or, as a student last Wednesday gave the example of Chinese. You know, Chinese is written with ideograms, that is to say, symbols that represent entire concepts. So the Chinese felt the need to Latinize their spelling so that they could use the alphabet that half of the world uses, right? So they developed an alphabet or a writing system based on the Latin alphabet, the one we use. So that is also corpus planning.
And that can be taught by means of the acquisition planning.
Well, then there have to be decisions about teaching. It's not that you don't teach through acquisition planning. There are decisions about teaching the new alphabet or the standardized variety of a particular language, and that decision is what counts as acquisition planning.
But you made a point that is an interesting one, that these decisions are interrelated, right? So, of course, decisions about corpus planning will have an impact on acquisition planning, what languages varieties are taught. Usually those that are standardized and codified in grammars, dictionaries, orthographies. Also, we think about the case of languages that are spoken and they don't have a writing system. So, designing a writing system to codify those languages will also count as a corpus.
So that is a very important issue, because you find in your paper by Lobianco 6 categories of planning. Those are not the only possible categories. Some authors don't agree with that number. And some propose more categories, some propose fewer categories. And what is crucial is to understand how these are not watertight compartments, but there can be interrelationships, and there are cases that count as instances of several categories simultaneously. Okay? What is important is that you understand what is meant by corpus planning, what sort of decisions involve corpus planning, what sort of decisions involve acquisition planning, what sort of decision involve prestige planning, etc., etc.
And how these decisions are affect each other, because the decision to codify a particular language variety will have consequences in the promotion of that variety within a particular speech code. And you have a question.
Yes, it's not the same to say standardization is all the time, right?
No, I mean standardization is part of plan. Okay. It's a process that can be part of part of the plan. Now,
Did you hear, guys, or did you read what happened, or what RAE did some weeks ago in relation to, or what it did together with the Spanish military? No? No? They signed an agreement, Real Academia Española and the army in Spain. They signed an agreement to, among other things, modernize the vocabulary of Spanish, especially the vocabulary that is to do with war terminology. For example, they felt the need to update the vocabulary to talk about new weapons and new tactics, and I don't know what else could be new in war, but an update in the vocabulary of a language counts as what kind of planning? Corpus planning, exactly. So the vocabulary of Spanish will be altered. There will be what kind of change? Lexical change that will not take place as you studied, that is, each new generation using the incoming variant more frequently, and the older generations using the traditional, the old variant less frequently as time goes by. This is, let's modernize vocabulary today. And from now on, we're going to use these words in the army to talk about these objects and these events and these actions, etc. So that is affecting the vocabulary of the language deliberately in this case, and that's it. Corpus.
Would that be changed from above?
No, because change from above and change from below usually involves the more spontaneous, everyday use of the language and how the change gets spread, etc. This is just a top-down decision.
Too conscious.
Very, yeah. It's actually deliberate. Yeah.
I have a question regarding standardization and codified expressions. What is the difference?
Codified.
It says codified expressions reduce variation.
that is not
Codification.
is part of
The Codification of a language involves pouring the standardized form into the books that constitute the core of the code. A dictionary, a grammar, an orthography. Okay? So codifying the language means putting it into these books that are usually the reference books of a language. And in order to codify, there needs to have been standardization.
That is like the last step. First, the process of standardization involves first selection of one alternative, then normalization, or just, reducing, variation in how that, for example, expression is written, and then codification, which usually is the last part of the process of standardization. That's right. So, let's listen to some Lucia Lepori. Okay. What's the relationship between language policy and language planning? Which are, the words in the title are very important. So, do you think?
I think it's because language study requires policy. So if you want to organize, for example, what is called school, you need policies of languages. Then you can use something.
But is it according to Lobianco, is that always the case that language planning requires policy?
No, some cases teachers realize that maybe the policies are not up to date or not effective. And in that case, they can go against it or change it somehow. Plan language in their own way.
Notice that in most cases, top-down decisions not always work because implementation is key, right? And policies are as good as they can be implemented, right? If a policy is not feasible, doable, then it will not have the expected effect.
Yeah, especially when they're made by people who are not in the classroom experiencing this, so maybe they cannot have the idea of what happens in practice, they just know here.
That's right. That's why, what does Lobianco recommend? Who should be involved in language policy decision? Okay, social actors, including teachers, researchers, what else?
Parents.
Okay, right, members of the community that will be affected by those decisions, right? Parents, students, consulting, local authorities. So notice that he calls for decisions that are not unilateral and top-down, but that are taken on the basis of discussions, right, with the people that are involved. So going back to language policy, then it's the product of language planning in some cases, right? Especially in the kinds of language planning that you study, right? As traditional kinds of language planning. The product of status planning is usually a policy regarding the status of languages or language varieties in
Hello?
society.
You mean a law
Right.
or an act?
A public text that, they prepare it depending on the Constitution or any other act that is passed to that effect by, of course, law enforcers. Okay? That's the key thing. What about purpose planning? Who is involved?
I have a question about status planning. What's the case, or let's see how I ask it. Is Spanish the official language of Argentina by any law? Is there any public text with the force of a law that establishes Spanish as the official language of Argentina? Have you found out?
The Constitution.
Is it? No. Spanish is the official language of Argentina, but not by any official document that says so. The Constitution doesn't declare Spanish the official language of Argentina. And what about English in the UK?
Yes.
Well, to begin with, the UK has no constitution. That's
Magna Carta.
the Magna Carta. Okay. And what about English in the US?
It is. There is no official language in the US. I mean, because there are many languages, and in that sense, there is no document that establishes the official language.
Well, now it is.
Let's Google it.
Yeah.
Right now.
Perhaps
Right
I'm
now.
wrong.
Ask your favorite bot.
Huh?
Now.
No, porque, o sea, yo pensaba que no lo consideras un idioma oficial.
Many of the materials that you could possibly find about the status of English in the US are now outdated. Okay. Read what you found out loud, please. Cristina, right?
Yes.
And your surname, Cristina?
Arias.
Arias. Okay.
So, English was designated as the official language of the United States in an executive order on March 1st, 2025.
Okay. So that's pretty reasonable. Yeah.
Not ago. Actually, recently.
So in the until February 28th, we used to teach that English was not the official language of the US except for one state, the state of California, that had, because all states can make their own decisions in the US. Some decades ago, California had declared English the official language. So, state-run schools provided education only in English. And they could provide education in Spanish for large Spanish-speaking communities in California, which you know there are a lot, only under certain specific conditions that were very difficult to meet. So that meant that, in fact, the state of California saved a lot of millions of dollars in the provision of Spanish or education in Spanish for Spanish-speaking populations. Something happened, but I don't know.
Lights turn on.
Okay. And because English was the official language, right? So it limited its obligations towards Spanish-speaking populations. But now this is new. This is brand new.
Here in an article from the CNN says that, a professor of language and literacy at Purdue University said that the founding fathers didn't see a need to declare an official language because English was pretty much the dominant language of the United States at the time. So there wasn't a need to protect it.
Exactly. It was the language that was used in the first meetings that the founding fathers had and the first sessions of Senate and the lower house just took place in English. So English was like the de facto official language. But then, why would you think that now, in 2025, the executive felt the need to declare English the official language? Why do you think there was a need for what kind of planning?
Status.
Why? Your name is?
Agostina Piñero.
Piñera. Okay, Agustina.
Because now there are many more communities that speak other languages, and there has been a lot of immigration to the U.S., so they need to establish one language as the official one, because what do you do with the other languages? I mean, it's like, how do we know which one is the language of the country?
Agustina, but immigration has been taking place for centuries in the U.S.
I know.
Remember the large waves of Italian immigration, Polish immigration, German immigration?
Maybe the decision was influenced by the political ideals of the actual president of the United States.
How do
the
you
current,
connect one with the other?
because he believes, well, that immigration should be stopped, let's say, or limited. So a way of establishing like a national identity that like excludes immigrants is establishing English as the official language of the country.
How do you like that idea?
And I completely agree, because it could be seen as a sort of hindrance to the, let's say, to the coming of immigrants to the country. I mean, because they would see that English is the official language, and other ones like Spanish are not, let's say, allowed. So,
They have to make a difference between the status that each language holds in the country.
Okay, and
English is the official one, and the other ones are like foreign languages.
And do you think that that decision has been made on the basis of the merits or the advantages that English has over other languages?
No. It was made over a feeling of, or our language is, it's being threatened by all these other Spanish speaking people, for instance. So it was like a need to protect, even though majority of people there speak English, like the language and the national identity that is related to the language.
And what idea of the national identity is at play here?
One language, one nation.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the ideology.
Yeah.
But my question was, what is the national self that is being protected by this measure?
Traditional Americans speak English.
Exactly. White, Anglo-Saxon, English-speaking, Christian. I don't see Trump as a... Well, there are branches of the Republicans that are staunch Catholics, actually, more than Protestants. Right, so I meant Christian as a cover term for...
I would say that, at least to me, like the stereotypical American is the WASP.
Yeah.
So the fact that Protestantism is a part of that identity.
Okay. This is definitely not the idea of not a national identity, an American national identity based on diversity, not based on an identity that has been influenced and shaped by the contribution of immigrant groups. This is definitely a nationalist identity of a very extreme, or with a very extremist, chauvinistic, xenophobic flavor, right?
As if those born in the US with Latin American parents, let's say, weren't American.
Exactly, exactly.
But it's also very funny to think that, and when I say funny, I mean weird.
Right.
That if they do it in the U.S., it's like racist. But if they do it in another country that's maybe a colony, or like I'm thinking like Scandinavian languages that are from small countries with small population, it's seen as a good thing to protect the language. But because English is so widespread, it's seen as like, and also I really think tensions behind it. It's like
Right, definitely. So the interpretation of these measures is pretty much influenced by the social, historical context in which they are taken. I think I agree with those of you who think that this is only another manifestation of these rather reactionary, conservative sort of policies that are being implemented across the social life of America. This is related to also the deportations, the closing of the borders, the huge tariffs that have been implemented to protect American industries, etc., etc., etc. It's part of the same ideological package, right? Part of the same rhetoric, if you will. Yeah.
So, what is at the basis of language planning? Well, there is when we need to, you need to make connections between papers and think about concepts in plural elements, such
Right.
as ideology, as you described.
As Thomas says, the one nation, one language.
Yeah. Nationalism is not, of course, nationalism is not an ideology, a political ideology. However, you mentioned, right, one nation, one language ideology, that is a language ideology. Okay, so usually there are things that are more complex than just protecting an endangered language or language variety, and usually language decisions or decisions on languages have more to do with political views, right? Making a political statement. There is another kind of language planning that you read about in Loria, that is discourse planning. Let's see. Milagros, Milagros is up here. Okay. Oriana, okay. What counts as discourse planning?
I think they refer to how people express themselves. Well, the paper says that it's helping people participate
What you learn about language use is that the first thing that you learn is that people use the language differently depending on what activity they are carrying on, what is the institutional context in which they are carrying these activities, and of course what policies are enforced. So it's not just about how people use language, but more narrowly, decisions about how to use language within specific institutions, corporations. You can think about this school, right? Are you aware of any language policy regarding the use of language here at the school? For context of this chair, any language policy regarding how the language used to, write exams, to communicate?
The only thing I can think of is for example how to repeat the prompts.
Very good. Excellent.
Right. But there is a paper on avoiding sexism in language, and there are measures regarding avoiding uses of language that are considered sexist. That counts as discourse planning. Right?
I know others.
Is speaking up discourse, a way of discourse planning too, here? Because you are always reminding us, speak up, is that discourse planning?
That's because you're shy.
That is a practical issue that we have to deal with because of the acoustics of the classroom. It's not very good and there's noise. There's classroom management. More than that.
Yeah.
Good use of meta language beyond policy.
Good. Yes. It's required and expected.
There's an expression that is not very prepared or is usually corrected on the exams that is in order to. And I was thinking about, could that be a case of discourse planning? Because maybe I thought it was corpus planning.
No, we're not altering the English language.
Yes, it's only in
This
this
is the
institution,
use.
in this class.
The use of English for the expression of precise scientific reasoning. So that is discourse planning. And I'm glad you brought it up and that you're good at it.
And of course, a decision made on, ideas we share about, the problem of referring to intentions when, they cannot be captured. They are elusive, they are hard to prove. And of course, scientific discourse requires that what you said can be tested. Right.
So there are two more contributions.
Yeah, there are two.
People are eager to participate.
I wanted to mention, I googled it to make sure that I have the correct information. Last year, the Ministry of Defense prohibited the use of inclusive language,
In
and
which
people in
country?
the army use words like soldada, generala, cava. They can have like a punishment in a way.
Right.
So is that an instance of discourse planning?
So notice that in Argentina you have it. You have some schools that, for example, has humanities, I think, that you can present a thesis using these grammatical forms, including the new gender-neutral suffix. Other school that says here there are other ways you can do that. And notice that those are decisions that are taken by different institutions regarding how language is expected to be used within their domain.
So, the School of Communication also accepts the innovations that involve, for example, the use of the at symbol, arroba, or the X, or the E for gender neutral nouns and adjectives. That means if you write your trabajo final de licenciatura in that school, you may use any of those options. But in this school, you have to stick to normative Real Academia Spanish norms. So you can resort to other strategies to avoid the use of the generic masculine, but not the use of the A or the X. So last month I had to correct what is called un informe de avance de tesis. This is a doctoral candidate writes a report about what is the stage of her, or what what she's been doing lately, right? How long it will take her to finish, what courses she's taken, etc., etc. And the committee had to put it in writing. Please respect the current norms that are in force for the writing of or for the avoidance of sexist uses of language that are in force at the university currently. So, whether she likes that or not, she will have to comply because those are the norms for academic writing today. Can they change? Of course. Those are the rules. Okay, so that is discourse of this institution.
I'm sure there are many translators here who are aware of such policies taken in their work environment. Or you want to provide another example? Also consider effect on policies in social media. Notice what happens in social media that bans, language that may have, sexual connotations or, certain lexical items that are associated with,
This is something.
That's right. And then, of course, because there are such policies, then, we see, people do what they want sometimes. So they find a way out, they have a way in which they avoid using those forms, but also are able to make their point, and in doing so, they come up with innovations.
For example, using numbers to write words.
Exactly. So altering the spelling, sometimes altering the order of the syllables. Did you notice that the second syllable comes with
That is something the evening people taught us last Wednesday. And you brought up an example, which was?
I explained that I saw it both in Spanish and in English. And in Spanish, for example, instead of saying matar, it's desvivir or petit suisse, depending on the community. Yes, it's from a specific community. And also in English, it happens a lot. With euphemisms, with shortenings, and also signas. Acronyms.
If you pay attention, just for today, pay attention, you will be surprised how many instances.
Also using letters and emojis.
Right.
And also for Spanish, direct translations from English with same meanings. For example, instead of calling someone pedophile, they call them a PDF file, and then in Spanish, they call them archivo PDF.
Wow.
Yes. That's also from a specific community.
Okay, and one more example of discourse planning that you find in our virtual classroom. We find that there is a text that teaches you how to write emails to teachers. We hope you appreciate that for your future career as well, because that's useful not to just address teachers, but your future bosses, your whoever is above you in an organization that you're going to work.
And just one more question, and then probably we will open the floor to answer, to listen to your questions about the study.
Yes, I have a question. So we said that planning is not always deliberate, as the other definition said, deliberate efforts, right? That's my question. If, for example, because I thought of, well, my boyfriend works in a architecture studio, and they work for the US. So when they speak in Spanish within the office, they speak, sometimes they use words in English, but like with a Spanish form. For example, instead of saying, well, they say, for example, traquear or those kind of things, like the verbs in English but with Spanish forms. Is that's not something that their bosses tell them to do. It's just something that happens because they always speak in English with their bosses from the US. So in that case, is that discourse planning? But it's something that it's not conscious.
It's not deliberate.
Right, it's like spontaneous.
Right, decisions by employees within that community, spread, and then they become shared, and so this is part of the kind of lesson planning that is not planned.
And you see, there isn't an explicit policy that establishes that should be the case. It's just a spontaneous thing that came up in the group.
And in some cases, they intersect, because I was thinking about what you said about, the spelling in German, and when I was, a long time ago, I was surprised by, when I looked what, teenagers, they started using, different graphemes to represent that one because they don't have it in all keyboards. And that was something that was used at university. And of course, you are not taught that when you study German at an institution. And then now it's part of, an official decision. So, the innovation started probably among, certain groups. And then, this innovation spread, and of course, eventually it came to a decision regarding, the spelling of German. But probably at the beginning, it was not just a conscious decision, it was a way out to, write it with a keyboard that doesn't have that symbol, and not taking the trouble, to have to look it somewhere else, copy, paste, and fill. So, yeah. And notice that Lovienko refers to performative action. What is performative action? What does Lovienko consider performative action?
Isn't like I state, I say, things that you're doing, what you say you're doing.
Come back again, because I did not follow.
I think I'm mistaken, so forget about it.
Notice that Lovienko says that what celebrities or well-known public figures do is so salient that it tends to get reproduced. So what a president says, or the way in which a president uses language, is likely to be imitated by some, right? Probably the followers, and of course, it may have other reactions to that. But notice what happens. This can have a massive effect, and therefore it says, okay, this is a different kind of lesson, language plan, right? Performative action is a kind of language plan, not always deliberate, and not definitely not always a kind of language planning that gets manifested in a law or an act. But it's very important, to be considered as within this wider definition of language planning. Right? So another kind of language planning refers to decisions taken by important figures in their public speeches and how they affect what other members of the society and the choices of other members of the society. Questions? questions about this?
I was just thinking about one example some minutes ago, that is Swiss. I think it's a performative action because the term emerged from an influencer, a streamer, and he started to use the term, so...
Can you speak up?
Yes, sorry. The term emerged from an influencer,
Which term?
Petit Suisse.
Uh-huh.
And
Which means?
yes.
Okay.
He started to use the term, so the videos didn't get banned, and then the term got viral, and many people started to use it. So that is performative action, but it's not deliberate because, I mean, I didn't think he tried to impose
Right.
the term. He used it in order to avoid his videos being banned.
What's the connection between Petit Suisse and that?
There is no reason to avoid saying
Right.
you or die.
So, your
Because it is
reference
banned.
to
And I have a
French and
question.
everything.
It actually comes from a Spanish YouTuber who uses Petit Suisse to mean suicidio, suicidarse.
Okay.
So the Swiss part is actually the connection. And Martin
Right.
Senior started to use that because he saw her do it. But he uses it more generally to mean any form of death.
Yeah, like do you know that rock band System of a Down? So they have a song called Chop Suey, which is about suicide, and they couldn't exactly they couldn't name their song Suicide, so they went for this. What's the name of the? When you avoid a taboo term using se me fue la palabra? Euphemism, sort of. Okay, now that makes sense.
I have a question because this influencer uses these euphemisms because if not, he cannot get money from his videos.
Right.
Would that be discourse planning because he's following YouTube's guidelines on how to use language?
Yeah. Yeah.
At
No.
least in order to get money.
Yeah. That's not the reason why it's called discourse planning. The reason it's called discourse, or it could be considered a case of discourse planning, is because his use of the language is shaped, molded, affected.
But it's not performative action because there's no ideology. He's not like trying to.
Well, if that model, if that works as a model for others to imitate, from what you're telling me, that has been the case, his own behavior can be taken as performative action because it affects, it influences the discourse of others.
There's no ideology behind it. It's just, I'm thinking that it doesn't count as performative action because there's no ideology behind it. It's just like a way of getting around.
Well, that's a very pragmatic solution to get his money.
Performative because one figure uses it and the community speech in which the involved starts using it.
Even if he did not mean for other people to use the terms, it's still performative action.
Yeah, yeah.
I noticed that, of course, you may have many individuals. The thing about social movements, in those cases, you don't have just one individual, but think about groups, like feminist groups, in which the way of using language in demonstrations and how it acts. Of course, it shapes or conditions the way other members of society will use language in turn. And you had a question.
Yeah, so however, as time passes, sometimes public figures lose their status or their celebrity status in society. So maybe the performative action or the speech that they manage to push on society can decrease then as their fame decreases. So sense it's still language planning if it does not last.
But then language planning, of course, it's not one and forever. We said it can change. It actually changes. Yeah, yeah. And of course, we are not thinking about speech, but ways of using language. Okay. Yes.
Yes, I know performative actions is a type or kind of language planning, but what is the difference? I don't see the difference between performative actions and language planning.
No, performative action is a way of, one possible way or means through which language planning can be carried out. What are the other possible means through which language planning can be carried out? No, that's a kind of language planning. Possible what means through which language planning can be carried out is through public texts. What does that mean?
For example, official documentation.
Exactly. The Constitution, language acts, education acts, the Constitution, those are documentos públicos. Okay? Another possible way.
Status planning. Status planning.
No, that's a kind of language planning.
Okay.
Perhaps public speeches or no. Okay, I get your point. Another means through which language planning can be carried out is through public debate. That's it. Which involves, it can involve a public speech that is talked about, discussed publicly. And another means through which language planning can be carried out is through action, performative action.
And manuals, like book manuals, like for
You
example.
see how these categories that Movimiento offers are never enough sometimes? So, what about your proposal? What do you
Maybe
think?
English manuals, like the ones we use to teach English. I don't know, those established by the publishing houses. Oxford,
Teachers' books. What would you say? Does it fit in any of these categories? Course planning es planificar para ahora lo que estamos pensando es no qué aspectos de lengua vamos a modificar, sino a través de qué materiales, documentos, comportamientos o acciones vamos a hacer lo que hagamos y vamos a hacer en el. Entonces, los manuales de estilo o los manuales que fijan reglas gramaticales, etc. ¿Calza en algunas de estas categorías? ¿Calza en public texts? ¿Calza en... what's the other category? Public discourse. Y calza en performative action. But still you feel that those texts are part of some sort of language planning and they are doing something, okay? Probably you should come up with another category.
But wouldn't in that case the folks we're talking about be inside this public text and the Education Act one day dictate what will be taught?
But they're not as specific.
No, but Claro, pero te van a decir, tal spring se van a dar estos materiales con esta currícula.
Okay, but they are not establishing which specific textbook you're going to use, published by, eso sería un escándalo, el lobby de las editoriales. Todavía no hemos llegado ahí. Casi. El lobby llegó hasta presionar para que sea el inglés. Hicieron lobby, hasta que dijeron, bueno, el inglés es obligatorio. Brindaron todas las editoriales. Ya si dicen usen Longman, sería caso de corrupción. Pero piensen en los manuales de estilo de las empresas para las que ustedes van a trabajar o para las que van a traducir, porque son todos traductores excepto por esto. What sort of means to carry out language planning are those? Could we call them public text? Could we call that public discourse? Could we call that performative action? Probably discourse. I don't know. Discourse, if it's taken as in a very large, in a very wide sense, because in its wide sense, discourse involves producing and having text circulate and consume. So probably that fits there. Probably. Right.
And maybe as a reaction, the status planning of Argentina can be linked to the language commodification, the commodification of English,
Exactly.
right here in Argentina,
Yes.
to react to that decision of the US government.
Well, it hasn't reacted to that decision because, as you saw, the U.S. policy has been implemented just very recently, and Argentina has been teaching Spanish as an obligatory subject for decades now. The law was, what year was that law passed? 1994, I think.
I don't remember exactly, but it was
Yeah.
way before
It's
that.
older than you are.
And there is status and corpus planning also, right? So,
Which one?
the law that you said, is that there was a law and there was
The law I meant was the law that establishes English as the language to be taught as a foreign language in primary education and part of secondary education. What kind of... What, that's acquisition planning because it indicates what languages will be taught for students to acquire or learn in the official school. Okay. Any other question? So, guys, those categories, all those categories of different kinds that you find in Lobianco's paper, like the 6 kinds of language planning, the 3 different means through which language planning is carried out, etc., all the other categories. Take them with a pinch of salt. They are orientations for people to think about different kinds of language planning, okay? But don't take them as, like I said, they are not watertight categories. Somebody had a question, yeah.
I was thinking, related to the example that you gave about when you work for a company and they have certain guidelines of language use, terminology or style. Is that usage planning or is it more purpose planning?
No, it's I should say it's neither. It's not corpus planning because that is not affecting although it could be. Yeah, you could consider it a case of corpus planning. Yeah.
Within the company.
Yeah. And the other one you meant?
Usage.
No, the usage planning definitely it is not. Let's look at the definition of usage planning.
Yes, I was looking at the definition and thought it didn't fit, but looking at all the others, I was like, it really makes sense.
Let's see. Let's go back. Let's go to the page where usage planning. Usage planning involves increasing the domains in which a language. So this doesn't involve using certain pronouns or avoiding certain words. This is a language. Increasing the domains in which a language is used. Usage planning occurs mostly in opposition to a dominant language after political change. For example, the case of Gaelic in Ireland, in which English was the dominant language, and there were decisions by the government to increase the uses that Gaelic was going to be put to. For example, it was made obligatory for Gaelic to be used in ATMs. Ustedes saben lo que es un cajero automático. So, all ATMs were only in English, but the government made it official to use Gaelic in ATMs too. So, when you inserted your card, you could choose English or Gaelic. That is, allotting a function to a language which it didn't used to have.
So another example could be Guarani Sarawak.
I am not familiar with the case, but has it been allotted new functions?
I don't know if new functions, but I know that I think it's mandatory to teach Guarani in South. That's
Okay, so that is acquisition planning.
but it's
But-
a minority language.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. But usage planning would be a case of usage planning if the Paraguayan government decided that from now on Guarani is also going to be obligatory, or it will also be used to what other functions could it have?
Right, legal documentation.
Okay. If it would be used to print ballots, las boletas para votar. Okay? So if the language is given more and more and more uses, then that counts as usage. The thing is that French in Quebec is the official language. It's not a minority language in Quebec.
But it is in the rest of the country. I think it's status planning because the Bill 101 established French as an official language in Canada.
So that is status planning rather than usage planning. But imagine that the Quebecois recognized an indigenous language as official too, and they decided that that particular indigenous language will have new functions in the community. That could count as usage planning.
But making French available in the rest of Canada that would be fine too, right? Even if it's official in Quebec, it's not in the rest of the country.
Exactly. So let's decide all the other provinces, let's imagine all the other provinces in Canada decided that they're gonna write all street signage, la cartelería, in English and French. So that would be a case of usage planning. Putting French to a new use.
And here in Córdoba, there's this Armenian neighborhood in which the names of the streets are written in Armenian. Would that be usage planning?
Yeah. The thing is, usually usage planning is of an official. I don't know if that. Right, right. So that could be a case if, I don't know, el centro vecinal de barrio Boireda, no sé, Alto General Paz, Boireda, they made the decision to do that and we decided to give Armenian that function. And we haven't discussed this at length, but there are symbolic forces, usually, not just political forces, but there are also, and symbolic comes hand in hand with the political, but symbolic forces that are involved in the decisions that affect language in a community. Okay? Like English in the US is a symbol of a particular national identity, and Armenian is a symbol that stands for the identity of the community of that particular neighborhood. Are you from that neighborhood?
No.
No? Anybody from Barrio Pueyrredón? Have you seen those things? Great. Any questions? Have you done the questionnaire? Have you answered the questions? No? Do it. Those are study questions. Have you worked on the main issues of the paper? So answer the questions for your own benefit. Now, if those of you who did answer the question have any question about the questions, it's a good opportunity to ask today. No? If you understand all the questions, you didn't have problems answering anything. Get those categories, they're very, very old.
Sorry, what? Can you repeat the question?
The distinction between cultivation and policy planning. Forget about it. It's useless to add two more categories when we've been criticizing the categories and saying that the categories you already have are not enough or they are actually fuzzy. Yeah. Okay, excellent.
Something like you mentioned the question about Bengali.
The question about Bengali.
Bengali, sorry. When it says what language is used to refer to the Bengali words adopted by teenagers and non-youths. I don't know.
What was the question again? What question number?
My number
Second page. Okay. Are you all there? Question should be 11. We need to add numbers.
Yes. I did mine already, but we will
There is another correction that needs to be made in the file. All the names of languages should be written in capital letters. So Wichi, Ilaga, etc. should be spelled with capital. So this should be question 11. Lobianco mentions the Bengali Academy. Find out where Bengali is spoken. We did.
Yes. Maybe Bangladesh.
All right. When were they?
When states of India, Senegal, from where it originated.
Right. Okay, so you got that part. Find out where Bengali is spoken and look at the map to locate those countries. Easy peasy. What name is used to refer to the Bengali words adopted by teenagers in London's comprehensive school? Okay. Did you find what's the name that is given to those words that are Bengali words used by London teenagers?
I found out English.
Okay.
Correct answer because it was English. Yeah.
Okay. Or bomb, or the words, the vocabulary that is of Bengali origin. And did you find example? Did you find example? The woman, what's her name? Agustina? Nunari. Did anybody find examples of Bengali words used in the English of London teenagers? Did you get curious about how English is mixed with a different language? You can even find videos on YouTube, so you don't have to you don't need to transcribe them. You just listen to what present-day teenagers in London speak. That could change your idealized idea of what a white Britain sounds like today in the city of London. They don't sound like sounds English, definitely. They don't sound like the listening comprehension texts you did in language 4, definitely. So just out of curiosity, check them out. See what you would find if you took a plane today and landed in London. You have no idea. The what?
Language planning.
Yeah.
Acquisition planning can be by parents also.
Ah. What do you think?
I asked her because I have personal experience talking about it, but my grandma.
Speak up because that's an interesting case.
Okay, my grandma.
Can you hear her? Nayara, come on.
My grandma's dad was Paraguayan. He spoke Spanish and Guarani, and he prohibited his children to learn Guarani because he thought that it would affect the way they speak Spanish. So I think that it's acquisition planning taken by the parents,
Absolutely, yes. And notice that that is not a, because that is not a state, a national state or a provincial state making the decision, but a member of the family. Then you can call that family planning, family language planning. And you can add, if you want, you can add acquisition to the label.
The thing is that they were living in Paraguay and then they moved here. The older brothers and sisters of my grandma
know Guarani because they started school at Paraguay in which Guarani is spoken and spread.
Right.
But then she didn't learn it because she started school here in Argentina.
Absolutely. Yes. And there are families that make decisions that are not so restrictive as this example. Maybe they decide, if they're a multilingual family or a bilingual family, they decide to use one language for certain activities and a different language for other activities. For example, using Hebrew to pray, and then another language, for example English, to carry out the rest of the activities in the house, to chit chat, to comment on the TV program, whatever. But then one activity is carried out in a different language.
And the ideology would be normative monolingualism. The ideology
If they are very strict about keeping the boundaries between the two languages separate, yes.
And also with the zero-sum ideology, because the zero-sum ideology, this idea that if you learn a language, then you are not going to acquire the other language.
Exactly. That languages are mutually exclusive. So learning one language or acquiring a language is an obstacle for the acquisition of a different language. Good example. Yes.
Power.
Where are we? You've read the paper. How do you explain the title of the paper? Why global, why English medium? Plural.
what paper did you say?
The paper Global English by Penny.
What I understand is that English is a language that is spoken by many people around the world, not only in English speaking countries, but also English can be spoken by so many countries as a second language or as a foreign language. And that I understand that English is globally spread.
Definitely. That's why the adjective global is applied.
Yeah.
But then why Englishes and not English? Because what you said is correct. English is spoken as a mother tongue, first language in many countries. In many countries that some authors describe as inner circle countries, meaning countries like Great Britain, England, the US, Canada, Australia. Then those authors that think about or conceptualize the distribution of English think about the inner circle and the outer circle, which includes countries like right, former British colonies like
India.
Right. Malaysia. And then there are other countries that fall out of that outer circle. The so-called expanding circle, which includes countries like Argentina, Brazil, many others. Now, then why English and not English?
Because the language adapts to the culture of each country.
Maybe English is to refer to different varieties of English.
Right.
The commodification of English has led to changes within the language, which as a consequence, new varieties emerge.
Exactly. So here the plural mark that is attached to English denotes the fact that there are many different varieties of English, and there isn't only one. Okay.
Also, the paper argues for the idea that perhaps what has been viewed as a negative label, such as Japanese or Spanish, can be seen not as a negative label, but as a recognized variety of English.
Exactly. All right. So the paper explores the connection between this particular language, English, and a historical, political process that has been taking place for many centuries now, which is the process of globalization. The author actually argues against a narrow view of globalization as a 21st century phenomenon. And he says this has been taking place since the 15th century or even earlier. And he also disagrees with the view that globalization has been only the expansion of the British Empire and European influence and the American industrialized, consumer-led new form of imperialism. It is more than that because there are other countries in addition to Great Britain and the US and Central Europe that have been involved in this process of globalization. Did you find any? There is a definition of globalization. There are a couple of them, and the author argues that some are more precise than others. So we're not going to repeat here what he understands by globalization, but the question is, do you have a question? Do you have any doubt about that? Do you have any question about what he understands as globalization? What do you understand as globalization? I'm sure you studied globalization in a different course, right? So how did you see globalization in your culture class, in your culture subject? In your culture. Great. Which one did you like best?
I mean, they are depending on the view you have of globalization, if it's a positive one or
Yeah.
So?
So he takes a more positive perspective. For Friedman, he says that it has led to negative opportunities in education. And also Picasso, he's more critical. He says that it has led to more drawbacks, like the
homogenization,
like maybe losing certain aspects of some cultures.
So,
especially the American culture, he speaks about a process called McDonaldization.
Okay. How do you like that idea? Do you think that globalization, or rather, I asked you about your personal opinion, you didn't take the opportunity, so now, Pennycook. What's Pennycook's view? Does he agree with the view that globalization leads to greater homogenization? Homogenization meaning it leads to the disappearance of differences.
There's a risk with this idea of homogenization.
Why?
Because I'm reading, and he states that the idea that the widespread of English leads to a homogenization of the language does not account for the fact that the spread of English is also a result of a desire to learn English. So it is also an active desire to acquire English.
Right. But then, I totally agree with you. But that would answer a different question. The question about homogenization. Let's concentrate on that aspect. Does this global spread of English, according to Pennybook, lead to everybody speaking the same language, the same variety of language across the globe? No, you answer that. You guys answered that before we talked about homogenization. You spoke about many different new varieties emerging in the contexts in which English is used. So this is quite the opposite. There's no homogenization, there is heterogenization. What seems to be a unified language actually becomes more and more diverse because new varieties emerge. New varieties in the so-called inner circle countries, in the outer circle countries, in the expanding circle countries. He criticizes that idea of the circles. He disagrees with that for a good reason. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Think about not just the homogenization of English or of the languages. Think about the homogenization of cultures. Are you guys perceiving what Costa Picasso predicted? Every culture becoming just one uniform, less. One uniform culture, or do you see diversity?
Maybe not for countries, but we, for example, have adopted from the US. We have adopted from the US is the culture of Christmas, of Halloween.
Right. And we do this exactly the same as they do, right?
Not exactly.
There is always a local flavor. I know you celebrate Halloween on October the 30 something, right? But it is with a local flavor. It is true also that there are commercial interests, that this is part of an expansion of Americanizing beliefs and cultural aspects on other countries. But it is, even if we admit that, we also need to recognize that there is there are local appropriations of those parties. I'm not saying it's all good with Halloween spreading across the globe and everybody now celebrating Halloween. I'm saying that does not, however negative that could be, that does not necessarily lead to a homogenization of all cultures.
We usually think English affecting other minority languages and cultures, but the same thing happens the other way around. The other countries affect English
and languages.
languages emerge.
Exactly. Exactly.
So there is no homogenization. Every community shapes the language and the practice.
Right. There is an author that Penny Cook quotes extensively in the paper. A scholar whose surname is Philipson. And he talks about linguistic imperialism. That is to say, how the spread of English is seen as a continuation of American and British imperialism in the world, and how the spread of English threatens minority languages. Pennycook admits that that is true, and what the Philipson describes and the negative consequences that the spread of English across the globe can have is true. However, Pennycook sees that there are some shortcomings. There are some issues that Philipson does not grasp fully. So he agrees with him, but partially. Why? Because according to Philipson, according to Pennycook, the linguistic imperialism perspective of Philipson ignores completely what Valentina mentioned a minute ago. The fact that people that adopt English may do so out of their own desire, not by imposition of somebody else, but because they are agents that make decisions about what languages they use, taking into account their own interests. So the spread of English is not always, and it's not in all cases, the result of an imperial project that imposes languages on others.
It's kind of, even if it's not imposed, like, forcefully, it's subconsciously imposed. Because if you're telling the world that English is the language that everyone speaks, you don't have much choice to lean towards that, to be able to have more opportunities and to be able to communicate with more people.
Well, that's a way of seeing it.
Because French is also a lingua franca, but not everybody is learning French.
Right. So there is definitely an quote unquote an advantage that English has over other languages, right? But what Philipson is saying is there are groups of speakers that decide agentively, actively to appropriate English because they see an advantage in doing that. An advantage for themselves, for their own interests. And that doesn't mean that they are being colonized over again by Britain or America. For example, there's a case here in Argentina of an Aboriginal people whose children learn Spanish, their Aboriginal language, and English at school. And it's the children that see the advantage of having fewer hours of their Aboriginal language at school and having more hours of English, because they see English as a means to getting a better job than what they could get if they learned only their Aboriginal language. So, some linguists in the past decades have been making efforts to protect and maintain certain Aboriginal languages. And in order to do so, they proposed not teaching English, or teaching fewer hours of English and fewer hours of Spanish in favor of their Aboriginal languages. Because they, the scholars, the linguists, who were already in a good position, they desired to save a threatened language. But they wouldn't ask the users of that language what they wanted. So it's kind of a patronizing approach, just deciding for the Aboriginal that it was a good idea to maintain and revive their language. Probably they didn't want to, because they saw disadvantages in being associated with a language that is perceived as backward. Definitely, that threatens that minority language, and that contributes to spreading English as a global language. But that is overriding the Aboriginal people's right to decide what's good for themselves.
Can this be linked to the concept of linguistic marketplace?
Absolutely.
English as a tool. English as a tool to.
When you think about the marketplace, or when you think about a language economy, you don't think about English as a tool, but English as having greater value than
it's not English, it's standard. Not the English itself, but standard.
Exactly. The concept, probably when you're thinking about how different languages compare in terms of value and prestige, the concept you have in mind is language economy, rather than marketplace. Okay, so one concept that Pennycook sees as missing in this theoretical perspective is the concept of agency. The concept of appropriation. The concept of hybridity. Mixtures. According to Pennycook, in the linguistic imperative perspective, languages are thought of as a unitary entity associated with a national group. So that is, this, according to Pennycook, this is reproducing the view that there is one language per nation. Okay? Instead of thinking about mixtures of languages that are in contact, like the London English, which currently incorporates words of Pakistani, words of Bengali, words of Jamaican English.
And that you said is related to the Creolist position. It is related to the Creolist position, right? Like this idea that languages are maybe mixtures or not with clear boundaries.
Exactly, absolutely. So one of Pennycook's proposals is to stop thinking about languages as if they were entities with well-defined boundaries that are associated with well-defined national groups. But to see English in a context of globalization involves admitting that people move from one territory to another. And just as they move, their languages travel with them. And they mix. They are involved in processes of hybridity, mixtures, appropriation. And in each specific social context, in each specific political context, in each specific historical context, users of English can, not all of them do, but many of them can, exert, it's not exert, they may exercise their agency. Do you understand what that means? They make decisions. They choose to make decisions about what languages are best for. There's a beautiful example that we normally comment on in relation to other languages. This is not English. It's an example that involves two European languages, but the principle holds. The principle is the same. There's a town in Austria, in the boundary between, right across the boundary between Austria and Hungary. Probably you've heard this example. The town of Oberwart. It's a town that is bilingual. It will speak Hungarian and German. And guess what happened? The men in this town are peasants, farmers. They have agricultural activities. And the women were all housewives. So they had to help with the farming activities, and they have to take care of the household chores. And that's all the perspective that women have in their horizon. Until the younger generations realized that they didn't want that kind of life. They wanted to get an education, get professional jobs as professionals, have their careers outside farming and milking cows. And gradually they started using German more frequently than Hungarian, because Hungarian was associated with all the farming activities and German was associated with becoming professionals. So gradually they started to adopt German more and more frequently. So guess what happened with Hungarian in that town? It was gradually displaced. That is called language shift. This is a kind of language change, like the one you studied, but instead of phonological change or a lexical change or a grammatical change. This is a change of languages. Okay? In Spanish, this is desplazamiento lingüístico. So one language gradually disappears in that community. It also takes many, many decades, and it happens, as we already learned, the younger generation uses in this case, German more frequently, and they use Hungarian less and less frequently. And nowadays, German is the language that prevails in a town where Hungarian used to prevail, a specific variety of Hungarian. That variety of Hungarian is about to disappear. Do linguists have any right in going back to that town and telling the women, you should go back to this dialect of Hungarian which is threatened by your choice. Your decision is threatening a dialect of Hungarian. You are not transmitting your Hungarian to your children anymore.
But obviously, an endangered language is not
No.
an endangered, right?
But do linguists have the right to tell people, go back to your threatened language, even if that goes against your economic future, your prosperity, your well-being, or just simply your desires? That's the point. Linguists have, for many years, made the decisions in place of the people that had to live their life. Okay? That's the point. So, this takes us back to Lo Bianco. Linguists could help, but not without the people involved. Decisions need to be agreed upon, and the interests of the people that speak those spoken language should be taken into consideration as well. So, neither extreme solution is a good solution. Good solutions involve the participation of the speakers of the languages that are threatened and the participation of experts together. Okay? I know this is a very polemical issue. That's why the paper, rather than providing answers, poses questions. And then there is the other question of these two other approaches to English, the World English approach and the Lingua Franca, English as a Lingua Franca approach. Or perspective. What are these two perspectives? The World English perspective and the English as a Lingua Franca perspective. These two perspectives, let's put it like this. The linguistic imperialism perspective, and you could also include here the language rights, or the linguistic rights perspective. This is a perspective like the linguistic imperialism perspective that also adds the element of human rights. Meaning, there are some scholars that see the maintenance of your mother tongue as one of the many inherent human rights. So, if your language is threatened, one of your human rights, the human right of being able to communicate in your mother tongue, is also threatened. in this particular paper, Pennycook doesn't discuss this perspective much, but he connects it with the linguistic imperialism perspective.
They are not equivalents, they are related.
Yes, they are related. But these two perspectives concern the impact that the spread of English has on other languages and on cultures, right? Yes. These are the two perspectives where English and English as the lingua franca perspective are about a different issue. They are about how the English language itself has been affected by how its grammar, its vocabulary, its phonology has been affected by English getting spread. So, these two perspectives don't care about, they're not interested in how English affects other cultures or languages. One of the criticisms that Pennycook levels against them is that the world English perspective and the English as a lingua franca perspective don't ask any sort of political questions. They are not concerned with the position of power and dominance that English has acquired in the global scene. So they are just perspectives aiming at describing the new features that English has, or Englishes have. For example, they compare Singaporean English with British English to see how the pronunciation differs, how the grammars are different, how the vocabularies are different. And the English as a lingua franca perspective is concerned with identifying. Do you understand what a lingua franca is? You do? But do you? Yeah? A language that is used for communication between
non-native speakers.
Non-native speakers of that language. Okay. So those guys, the English as lingua franca perspective, they're interested in describing what are the core vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation that those non-native speakers use to communicate effectively. So it's like they describe this particular contact variety of English. And they also don't ask any question about the politics of English, the position of dominance of English with respect to other languages. Okay? Do you understand that? These are 3 or 4 theoretical perspectives. If you want to include the language rights perspective, there's 4 theoretical perspectives to approach this phenomenon of the global spread of English. And Pennycook he's critical of the 4 perspectives. He sees some good contributions, but he also detects what he considers to be flaws, defects, pitfalls shortcomings.
No, apologies, I said so.
And there is something that he sees that is positive that all of them share. What is it that all of them share, have in common? That Pennycook sees as something positive.
But they are all in favor of diversity.
Excellent. Yes. So the linguistic imperialism perspective may be very pessimistic, and it may be short-sighted according to Pennycook, but is in favor of diversity. Just as the word English perspective and the English perspective, the Franca perspective in English. Well, the world English perspective is a label that has been adopted by the scholars working within this theoretical framework. And global linguistics is the title that Pennycook chose for his paper. And what's the shortcoming that all of them share? If we change the question, we could ask, what's the core of Pennycook's proposal to overcome the shortcomings of these perspectives?
Because they treat English, they treat English as a fixed entity.
Exactly.
So he proposes that we think about English in a more pluralized content where it is appropriated by different nations and it is heterogeneous.
So this is what Pennycook feels is missing in all the other approaches. Thinking about appropriation, hybridity, mixtures, agency, and not thinking about languages as fixed entities. This connects with ideas that you also find in the paper by Fuller and Lehman. Fuller and Lehman talk about translanguaging. Do you remember that term? It would be a good idea to start connecting them. Exactly. So that is what Pennycook is doing too. He's challenging the view that
Clear.
Exactly. And what people do when they communicate is use whatever resource they have at their disposal. Resources that come from this so-called historical entity called English with resources that come from this historical entity called Spanish or Bengali or whatever. And the fact that people have repertoires rather than having two languages in their cognition, what they have is one repertoire of resources that come from different sources. So, it's paradoxical when you're about to finish a program in English and in translation and in at a historical point in time when the very notion of language is challenged. But you see that at some point we came to actually considering that communication may involve not trespassing one message into another language only. That can be the case, but also communication occurs when people mix languages. And the interesting thing is that when you think about the uses of English in our community, those uses that involve mixing some English words in context in which Spanish could be used. For example, when you see sale or 50% off on shop windows, or order here en vez de ordene aquí at a burger store or whatever. You can, you can interpret the, in addition to the propositional meaning, the propositional meaning is the semantic load of the word, there is another, or there are several other layers of social meaning that can be interpreted together with the content, the semantic load. People are encouraged to todavía siguen quedándose cortos.
Pasa que le hicieron promocionar el tema.
Okay, guys. That is one challenging paper because you need to read it as any other argumentative text. Make sure you identify what position, what argumentative position other authors have, or Pennycook assigns to them, and then how he challenges those argumentative positions. Okay? Make sure you can identify these perspectives and what are the good points that Pennycook identifies in each perspective, and what are the shortcomings that he identifies in each perspective. Have you got any question about this paper? Is there anything you didn't understand? Probably you can ask next class. If you reread it and something is not clear, we will discuss a specific question. Otherwise, the next class we move forward and we do José de Vázquez's paper on I'm sure you will have lots of things to say about that. We will take some photographs of the neighborhood where that the very last paper about on Facebook. Probably Facebook is